Okay. All right, we'll let everybody into the webinar. Welcome to Powerhouse Arena's virtual events. My name is Chris, I'm the events coordinator. And tonight we're very, very proud to be hosting the Brooklyn Book Festival Bookends launch of Sleep Donation by Karen Russell, out now for the very first time in real print form. Karen will be in conversation with Carmen Maria Machado. There it is. If you have any questions, you can use the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen, and they'll take your questions at the end of the event. And let me introduce our speakers now. Carmen Maria Machado is the author of the best-selling memoir In the Dream House, the short story collection Her Body and Other Parties, and the comics collection The Low, Low Woods, which just came out today. She has been a finalist for the National Book Award and the winner of the Bard Fiction Prize, the Lambda Literary Award for Lesbian Fiction, the Lambda Literary Award for LGBTQ Nonfiction, the Shirley Jackson Award, the National Book Critics Circle's John Leonard Prize. Her essays, fiction, and criticism have appeared in The New Yorker, The New York Times, Granta, Vogue, and elsewhere. Karen Russell won the 2012 and 2018 National Magazine Award for Fiction, and her first novel, Swamplandia, was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. She is also the author of the novella Sleep Donation, the story collections Orange World, and St. Lucy's Home for Girls Raised by Wolves.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. This is Oscar and Ada. I don't know if they're in the bio, so they just showed up.
Okay, we'll get to their part.
Okay.
They want to hear their fellowship, Guggenheim Fellowship, 535 Prize, the National Book Foundation, the NYPL Young Lions Award, the Bard Fiction Prize, and is a former fellow of the Cullman Center and the American Academy in Berlin. She lives in Portland, Oregon, with her husband and children.
They missed their part. That was it.
Wasn't quick enough. All right, well, that is the illustrious bios, and I will hand it over right now. Thank you.
All right,
Thank
excellent. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. We are so glad to have you here. It's a real pleasure to know that we can still have events in these strange times. If you have any questions, put them in the Q&A, and I will get to as many as possible during the event. Okay, Karen, did you want to start off by giving us a short reading?
I do. Carmen, thank you so much. I've really been looking forward to this, and thanks to everybody who came. It turns out that in the era of Zoom, you really need some people to come for it to be an event. So I mean, you guys are the event, and I'm really so happy. This book has been out of print. It was never in print. This book was published as an ebook in 2014. And I was so thrilled when Vintage said that they would release it in paperback. It sort of went into this purgatorial state where I'm sure you could still find a pirated PDF online if you were so inclined, but you know, it was a sorrow to me that it wasn't available. And then I got the green light to work with these amazing Italian artists, Ale and Ale. And I'll show you guys. I thought the Vintage team did such a gorgeous job. There's this king baby on the back, as my son calls him. He thinks this is a story about a king baby, which maybe we can, co-author later in life. But yeah, I'm so grateful to Vintage for putting this into the world, and I was happy to see it like in physical bookstores, even if it's a little bit of a harder thing to browse a physical bookstore at this moment. So I'll just read a very little bit from the beginning. It's a story about an America where millions of people have lost the ability to sleep, and there's a new technology that takes donations of sleep from healthy dreamers for insomniacs. I think this was like the invention that I've most wanted all my life. It's just some way to like transfuse good sleep into a body. The sleep van. That's the sleep van. I also feel like maybe I should just show you guys the pictures. That's the part that I feel best about at this moment. The siren goes and we code for dispatch. 9 times in 20 lately, it's the same address. 3300 Cedar Ridge Parkway. Then we get a call back saying the dispatch is canceled. Then we get a third call. No, disregard the cancellation. Get a sleep van to that property stat. What's happening as revealed to us by a visibly distraught Jim. Mr. and Mrs. Harkonnen are having a dispute. Mr. Harkonnen says he wants to drop out. So what, says the intern. We don't even use his donations. No, jackass. He's trying to get out with baby A. Everybody looks over at that. Rudy slaps his bald spot and leaves his hand there. A grapefruit hue spills underneath his fingers as if the scalp is blushing. Jim freezes in the center of the trailer in full view of every staffer and rubs his fists against his gray eyes. It's a pitiful and futile gesture to witness, like watching an animal cower inside a plastic cage. Because we can see how scared Jim is of losing both things, baby A and our good opinion of him. 6 staffers are working the phones tonight, and we are all mentally coaching him. Don't cry, Jim. Our sleep station has an unusual top-heavy hierarchy. We have 2 supervisors, the Storch brothers. They are former CEOs who left the business world at the height of the insomnia crisis to found the not-for-profit Slumber Corps, who now freely give all their resources to its efforts. Money, time, intellect, leadership, creativity, toilet seats. The Storch has made their fortune in the ergonomic toilet business, and you might have seen their advertisements. To shit upon a Storch feels better than a visit to your chiropractor. Their extreme altruism is a provocation to everyone else on staff, an inducement to work even harder, a reminder that we could always be giving more. Rudy and Jim have been my supervisors for 7 years. I was the first recruiter assigned to their team. I don't socialize with them outside of work. Our contact is limited to this office, unless you count our public performances at core fundraisers, the charity balls, and charity golf-offs. But I know every shadow of my boss's faces, all their storchy ticks. That upsetting thing Rudy does with his pen caps, what Jim is not saying at our meetings. The brothers are middle-aged Irish twins, clean-shaven and built like longshoremen. Externally, they have slate eyes and cranberry red hair, balding in identical horseshoe patterns. Internally, each brother has his own uniquely fucked emotional metabolism. Rudy, for example, is currently managing his despair by bawling out the interns, sweat drooling all along his dusky face like a July whiskey glass. The Storches are celebrities in the sleep crisis community. 8 years ago, the brothers served together as executive directors of the inaugural Slumber Corps board at headquarters in Washington, D.C. Within months, the Corps had established outposts in every major city, pullulating green offshoots of the DC base. Local branches began operating more or less independently, soliciting donations for sleep, whereupon the Storch brothers resigned from the board and requested a demotion to this low prestige placement in their home city, a solar zone assignment. They wanted to work directly on the front lines, to embed with us, according to Rudy, perhaps not the best choice of words during an insomnia epidemic. They claim to prefer our trailer to the DC offices. We serve an urban core where the rate of insomnia is 22% higher than the national average. Our Pennsylvania city is one of the greatest REM deficits on the East Coast, although we are certainly not the worst. Tampa riddlingly leads the nation in new cases of our insomnia. The governor's budget cuts in the Sunshine State have meant that Floridian sleep scientists remain stalled at the dang, go figure stage of their research. I was happy to remember I got that dig in when I returned to this. Because Florida, during our current pandemic, well, maybe we could talk about that later. I feel like the news is mixed. Hundreds of our old neighbors, friends, coworkers, and teachers are new insomniacs. They file for dream bankruptcy, appeal for slumber core aid, wait to be approved for a sleep donor. It is a special kind of homelessness, says our mayor, to be evicted from your dreams. I believe our mayor is both genuinely concerned for his insomniac constituency and pandering to a powerfully desperate new voting bloc. I'll stop there. That's sort of the premise. I don't know, Carmen. I really didn't know. I mean, where do we even start?
Where to begin?
I was working on this exactly a year ago, and our daughter had just been born. And at that time, I was like, I want to do a brochure for this book. This reissue. That's the brochure, Active Nightmare Outbreaks in the U.S. And I thought this was going to be like playful and fun. And we did like a nightmare contagion map. So you could see like the jellyfish dream is circulating in the mid-Atlantic states. There's a plague dream that's broken out around Phoenix. And who knows how it's going to read now. Now I'm like, well, this was in terrible taste.
Yeah, I guess we could totally start there. I guess I wanted to ask about your relationship with sleep. And I'm assuming it's gone through many stages. I mean, both in terms of like, just as you've like gotten older and also like you have children, like during pregnancy, having kids. And then of course, I feel like this question of the pandemic, like how you're sleeping now, like in the middle of sort of this chaos is really interesting. So yeah, like what is your relationship with sleep? How does it inform this book?
I love that question. I'm a really terrible sleeper. I feel like some friends who have kindly tuned in are probably also thinking about like me claiming to be an insomniac holding like 2 venti coffees in both hands. I feel like there's some skepticism of that claim, but I've always been a really terrible sleeper. I mean, I've also always loved horror fiction. And so I think, that you have to take some responsibility then. If you're just sort of like mainlining nightmares, then your electricity bill is going to be really high. And you're going to, in the 6th grade, you're going to like limp into class with just like ghoulish eyes from a night of reading It or whatever. So I take some responsibility for being on a steady diet of nightmares, fictional nightmares my whole life. But it wasn't until, I wrote this book when I was a single woman and I was sort of bouncing around, doing different teaching gigs and living in illegal sublets and walking the gangplank at 4 a.m. And I thought I knew a lot about insomnia. Mm-hmm. And then I had children. And I feel like, I don't know if that's just, there's something about being yoked to another person's sleep cycle. It's a special kind of powerlessness, I think. Mm-hmm. And it's also, I mean, it's one thing to sort of have nightmares yourself. But I've thought about that a lot. My son is 3.5 and he's just sort of started to have really kind of intense, at times he'll wake up and it just takes a while. He won't even let us comfort him. He's still sort of shaken up. And that's a real sorrow. And I think for me, it's just emblematic of what it is to love somebody. There's so much in that private wilderness, you can sort of stand outside and witness but you really can't walk with someone into that place.
Yeah. It's by definition lonely.
Yeah. I think it's coming. I mean, it sounds very obvious out loud, right? But there's just something about really so viscerally seeing, feeling like you're on in this borderlands between sleep and wakefulness, and you can really only push so far into somebody else's interiority, and that language doesn't really avail you much. I mean, trying to explain pain, trying to explain, one of the things I really love about all of your work is I feel like you've invented a new language for these unspeakable dimensions of our experience. But our son's 3.5, so he's not like a Carmen Maria Machado. He really we're not getting a lot about what these dreams are.
Well, I do feel like also the thing about dreams that's so strange is that like sometimes I feel like sometimes when one describes a dream, you're saying like, okay, this was happening, but also I knew in the dream that like I was in my house, but it didn't look like our house, or like it was this person, but it didn't look like this person. And there's this like, I mean, just the idea of like dream logic, right? Where like you are sort of like trying to explain, even if you have access to your own
right, and it's even as you're saying it, it's like melting bread in your mouth or something.
And I feel like there's something like also like when you wake up is so interesting, like in terms of like if you wake up like in the middle of a dream and you might like suddenly really remember it, but you remember the dream that you had most recently before you woke up, but you won't remember like one from that before, or like someone will say a thing to you and to like trigger a memory of a dream. You're like, oh shit, I forgot I had like a really crazy dream last night, and you said something that like makes
and where has it been lying in wait to ambush you all day, right? Yeah. And really you get the sense that you're catching it right before it takes flight forever, right? It will soon be irretrievable. You just managed to glimpse it, which is a wild thing.
And I feel like people always ask me, I'm sure you get asked this question a lot, like, do you write, like, do you ever get ideas from your dreams? And for me, the answer is like, no, maybe like 99% of the time, it's just gibberish. Like there's nothing in there that's like worth like writing down. But weirdly, idea for my comic book, The Low, Low Woods, did come from a dream. Sort of the central premise of it, where I woke up and I was like so upset by the dream. And sometimes I would wake up and I would write something down like in my phone, and then I would go back to sleep. And usually when I wake up, it would be nonsense. But I woke up and I was like, oh, that actually was a good idea. Wow, that like never happens, but it actually happened that one time. Which is nice.
Can you tell us about the dream that was so upsetting, or is that too
so the premise of the Low Woods is that these two friends in like 1990s rural Pennsylvania go to a movie, and they remember going to the movie, and then they wake up at the end of the movie and they have no memory of like watching it. And they know that something bad has happened to them, but they don't know what. And I had a dream that was like very disturbing, that involved like me like being asleep, like me being like asleep in the dream in a movie theater, knowing someone was coming to do some terrible thing to me and someone was with me, and being like, okay, but if I keep my eyes closed, then like the memory, and knowing the memory would go away. It was just this like really weird set of like knowledge, and like my eyes were closed in my dream the whole time. So I don't know, it was like very odd. But then I woke up and I was like, oh, that's like actually a really creepy image, like a weird idea. And then I wrote it down, and then like years later it became a project. So.
Right, or like feeling like you have to. I think that kind of fatalism, though, I feel like that's the precondition for, just the content is almost secondary for me sometimes. And what's truly terrifying is that powerless, feeling like there's some feeling of ambient destiny or something, or you really cannot intervene on your own behalf. Like it's as close to being a Calvinist as I ever come,
Well, there's also, so I also had this thing when I was a kid. So I would have night terrors, like the kind where you would wake up before your body would wake up. So you would be like frozen and paralyzed. I don't have them as an adult, but I had them as a child. And there's like an extension of that, this thing called exploding head syndrome. Are you familiar with it? So it's this thing that I guess happens if you are prone to sleep paralysis. You also are prone to this. And basically it's like when you're either falling asleep or waking up, there's like a roaring sound like in your ear. And so when I was a kid, oftentimes as I was falling asleep or as I was waking up, I would feel like something was chasing me like into sleep or out of sleep. And again, I don't have these as an adult. Like I don't really have like super bad nightmares as an adult. Like occasionally I do, but not really. But it was weird because as a kid, I also had this like sleep to me was tied in with like monsters and like being frozen and knowing something is in the room, but not being able to get to it, or like hearing this noise and thinking something was pursuing me.
Or your head turns into this giant conch shell and the ocean tides are coming in.
So weird. So yeah, I don't know. And I'm also the opposite where like, I mean, I don't have children, but I also am like a very like good sleeper. Like I sleep like a dead person and like never wake up for anything.
The number 4 would have come for you. They would have called you, rotodialed you.
I know, right? But like my wife will sometimes like, she has insomnia and I'll be like, do you just want to kill me when I'm just like passed out, completely oblivious? She's like, no. But like, it's weird because like as a child, sleep was so fraught and terrifying. As an adult, even when I'm in like a really bad state, like generally speaking, it's not an intense case of conflict. So I don't know.
I will say that's something the children have taught me, is that like sleep is the foundation of all human happiness in this life, and I mean, that's a new, and pregnancy, just to kind of the way that dreams reflect your reality and reveal things to you. I feel like, I don't know what role, maybe more will be revealed about why we dream. I like that it's still such an open question, for scientists, but I think of the opinion that it's not just, neuronal fireworks or, your cerebral janitor sweeping up and so that you have all this kind of like neurochemical effluent that becomes a dream. I mean, I really do think, particularly with recurring dreams, they feel absolutely significant to me. And it does feel sort of like the most honest communication a body can have with itself in a way. It's so profoundly unmediated. And it's the closest analog, I think, is writing, right? Because that's where, or reading too, where you're making this stuff up out of your own raw materials, and you're going to be the conductor, and you're going to be the symphony, and you're going to be the concert hall, kind of all in one. And dreams, I mean, I always feel like drafting is a little bit of a scary process in the same way as dreaming. You don't necessarily know what's on the end of the line, you don't know what you're going to drag into view necessarily, or where it's leading you, you know?
This is the creepiest.
Well, or yeah, and that's when writing's going well. That's like the best case scenario. More of the time, it's like.
I also, okay, so then the other sort of sides, obviously this book is about sleeping and insomnia, but it's also about a pandemic. So this idea of like this pandemic of insomnia, and also this pandemic of this one particular nightmare that this person either on purpose or by accident introduces into like the sleep pipeline.
Yeah, the national sleep supply.
Yeah, exactly. And so I wanted to talk about like the fact that you're now like re-releasing this project in the middle of a pandemic. Like obviously that's not on purpose, but also like how is it like I'm assuming it's weird. like I felt like weird reading your book and feeling a little
yeah, I mean, part of my own insecurity about it too, and this is just like a very self-focused insecurity, but I think like I don't know, I did an interview the other day where someone was like, great timing, and I just feel like I would much prefer that this book had been released into a world where there were zero parallels of the kind of, you know what I mean? Like in every case, I would rather be talking about sleep and dreams and nightmares and, digital technology, or in a more metaphoric and less literal way about a pandemic that we're in the midst of. I think that was one of the scariest things, was feeling like we went from this place where I was sending links to the CDC to these artists and the vintage design team, and we were like riffing on, these kind of brochures that have their own dark comedy to them, because invariably they're about something truly awful, and then it'll be, bullet points, or just like a picture, emoji agony, or just seeing the kind of mismatch of something genuinely horrifying and agonizing with like, a PowerPoint format.
Yeah.
I think there's some inherent comedy to that. I don't know, but less so now do I think that, because now we're all going to the CDC website for information.
Right.
So that was I'll show you like, this is everybody kind of like peeking at, I don't know if I angle that right. Peeking at the ward where the insomniacs are being dusked. People are helping them sleep with these sleep aids. Because this nightmare is so terrible that nobody can volitionally fall asleep anymore. And yeah, it is a strange thing. I can find the waterline in our email correspondence where the artist suddenly said, we're under our own lockdown now. And so sort of, I still think I feel whiplash from that experience of feeling like there was a speck on the horizon and watching it kind of saturate the entire globe in what felt like, it felt overnight to me, it felt like a period of weeks. But I also feel like this book wasn't much of a rehearsal for this scenario. Like I don't, and everything it didn't really, I think there's so much foreboding in this book, and there's a lot of foreboding also just about environmental and economic catastrophes, and sort of disrupting the rhythms of the planet and disrupting the rhythms of our bodies in a way that actually in insomnia, people losing the ability to sleep didn't seem implausible to me in the least. But I will say one of the parallels that I think is scary to me, that I didn't talk about a lot the first time this was released into the world, it's just watching like this secondary epidemic of misinformation and rumor and sort of really malignant conspiracy theories. And I love fiction for this. There's a way where if you read the history of something, it's already conjugated and it's been parsed and interpreted. This is going to sound like a little bit of non sequitur, but there's a book by Jim Shepard I love, The Book of Aaron. And it takes place, we all learn about the Holocaust in school, and we engage with that history in a different way, but like it sort of like rips the scab off, and suddenly it like returns you to this period where, and it's frighteningly, there are echoes of the way we're living right now, where no one is quite certain how seriously to take some of these threats to our democracy and way of life. And people are really, and the pacing of that book is wild. And I think Jim is a friend, and he's like a real fiction hero of mine, but the way that a crisis escalates and the way that you can go from sort of like a limbo of not quite knowing and uncertainty and foreboding and also, rationalizing and into a true abyss, the speed that can happen.
This is now reminding me of the weekend before the weekend before the week of the lockdown.
Right.
When it was just still stories on the news.
Right.
And it was like, I think breaking in like Seattle. And I said to my wife, I want to go get some groceries. I'm not trying to be crazy, but I'm just like, I had this weird moment where I was like, am I being really intense? And then I was like, it's okay. I'm not panicking. I was a Girl Scout. I'm just being like diligent. And I feel like that, yeah, it's weird how you can kind of exist in that periphery where you're like, should I be freaking out?
Yes.
Or am I freaking out?
Right before like Tom Hanks and the NBA came online to be like, it's time to freak.
Right.
You know?
Right, exactly. And I feel like also, I don't know, because like I also have like a pandemic story in my first book. And like I know a lot of other writers who have written, I mean, like I imagine like, you know, with Station 11 and like Severance and like other books that have come out in the last couple of years that are about pandemics, both sort of real seeming and real. And there's some, and I feel like people were asking me for a minute, like where I was doing like, you know, interviews and they were like, well, you know, your story like predicted it. And I was like, well, no, it's just that human beings react kind of the same way. Like it's like, if you're just paying attention to what's going on, like you could sort of predict like human behavior in these interesting ways. And it just means that not that you're pressing it, you're just like paying attention.
You're paying attention and you're just extrapolating from what you know about our nature.
Right, exactly. Right. Did you draw on any like existing sort of texts, or like were you thinking about any particular like diseases, or like in terms of just like, you know, like I was thinking about the idea of like a virulent thing being introduced into like the dream supply. Like I was thinking about like HIV, you know, I was like, and I just feel like there's all these interesting parallels you can draw. And like, did you like use any other sources? Were you like, are there other like pandemic stories that you like that you find very interesting?
Well, I love your story, and I love the formal play of that story. You know, I think in the same, like the questionnaires, like how kind of reduce about human experience and trauma, and you know, I love that's what one of the things. I mean, I think it's like I wanted it to feel more playful than it probably does, but this brochure in the book, I was like, this is such a fun attempt to sort of, you know, the kind of standardized, that you apply a template to something that is so subjective and spooky and, you know, difficult to translate as a dream. But I was thinking a little bit about HIV/AIDS. I think I felt wary. I didn't want this to feel too much like a one-to-one allegory.
Of course, yeah.
But and I also think that this protagonist sort of allegorizes her own experience. She's trying to figure out what genre of tale she's in. So it's a funny balance to strike. But I definitely was thinking about I read about the early days of that epidemic, and there's some similarities to now too, right? Where we don't really know that much about this mysterious illness, but we do know that it's traveling all, you know. Karen Thompson Walker has a beautiful book. Speaking of, I read it after Sleep Donation, but it's called The Dreamers. It's almost like the inverse of this book. You know, it's like a town where everyone's falling asleep into a coma-like illness, and they quarantine a college town. But she has a gorgeous line that I think about maybe daily now, where it's sort of, I'm paraphrasing, but just how illness travels the same channels as friendship and affection and love. And the way that disturbs, you know, all of our connections. So I think in this book too, I mean, like you were saying, I've never lived through anything like this, but you just imagine how terrifying it is not to understand the etiology of a disease or the transmission dynamics. And that's what we're seeing now, right? I mean, I think it's also been interesting to live in this sort of vacuum of information and see how dependent we are on one another, you know? In the early days, we were in Austin, and it was exactly as you described. There was like this 72-hour window where it was possible to sort of belong to both camps. You could like be a doomsday prepper and then like get a mimosa with your friend. And like these weren't like mutually exclusive clubs. And I just, every 12-hour period, I would look at something I'd done yesterday and think, wow, I was a monster, right? Like I was like, oh, I walked into that coffee shop with the kids. What was I thinking? You know, I let them like chew on the swing plastic, you know, which I mean, that's probably bad for them no matter what, but
yeah.
But sort of remember when everyone was like disinfecting their groceries, like it's just been so interesting to see like in sort of the absence of kind of hard data, how dependent we are on one another for cues as to sort of what's safe,
and I feel like something about like pandemic narratives that's always really interesting to me is where they fall, like in terms of the timeline of what's happening, because I can't help but think of In the Band Played On, which is like that really iconic book about like the very, very early days of HIV, and like that was written in like the 80s. And the guy and I remember like reading it, and it was horrifying because it's just sequential like paragraphs about like what's happening in terms of like the gay community and like the government and various like the CDC and various scientists and various like individual people. And then each time it changes, it just is telling you what the infection rate is. Like, it's just like infection rate number. And then, and like, you're also seeing people being like, is it in the, like, no one knows. And they're like, we think maybe it's in the blood. First of all, like, it's not in the blood supply, there's no way. And they're like, actually, it could be. And it's like really horrifying because all it takes is just this like steady ticking. And what we know now, it's like, and we know everything now, right? But at the time, like, nobody knew. And so I feel like there's something, right? It's like one day there'll be a book about this, and it'll be somebody like tracking these
looking at the different, right? And like the garden of like forking paths. I mean, I read this book, The Spectators by Jennifer Dubois, that I thought was excellent. And part of the horror and the outrage you feel, you're just restored to this place where, nothing is inevitable.
Yeah.
And you see, in fact, like that there were so many opportunities to save lives. And I'm sure that's true. I'm sure like a year from now, we'll be able, with the 2020 of hindsight. I mean, we know now. We don't need to go that far into the future.
Right.
I have to say, Carmen, I was nervous about this event. And then my husband was like, but you know what? Look at the debate. You guys are going to sound like orators, whatever you say. Like, just
go.
Your simple ability to pause and converse automatically elevate you. So it's a strange time.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about, one of my favorite parts of this book was I don't even know what to call it, like the sleep carnival, like the weird, like world fair. I don't even know how to describe it, but it like hit every pleasure button in my brain. And I thought it was just so weird. And it felt like you were talking about how like, around illness, there's like, conspiracy theories and like home cures and like, snake oil salesmen, and there's like all this sort of detritus like around, like the pandemic and people who want cures, and then you create this like physical place. So can you talk about that place and like how that idea came to you, like why?
I love that. I'm so happy. That makes me so happy. I had such a fun time writing that, and
it felt like you were having a good time writing it. I could like tell when I was reading it.
Yeah, so that it's these night worlds. I was imagining, of course, if you have this new population of insomniacs, and then elective insomniacs who are infected with this nightmare. So it's a strange sort of like, how if you go to a 24-hour diner or coffee shop, it's like this weird aquarium where there's just like a mixing of species where you're like, I wouldn't have thought you could all live here. But you're all good friends at this, at this 4 a.m. in this 4 a.m. lighting. So I think I wanted to kind of capture that, under this weird awning, and this sort of chronology is broken down. And there are these people who are just like starved down to a whisper. They haven't slept in months. And there are people who are like, that dream that I got infected with is so scary, I'm never sleeping again. And so they just kind of congregate in these speakeasies. I wish, I would love to go to a hug speakeasy right now. But I was imagining, like a boardwalk, like a little bit, throwback to Ray Bradbury, and, but just also the pleasure of the fairgrounds. I feel like abandoned fairgrounds are such fascinating places, always.
It's funny you would say that, because I literally just today was like, man, I need to go find my copy of Something Wicked This Way Comes, because it's like exactly the right time of year to read
October, right?
Yeah. And so that's so funny that you would say that, because I feel like, like my earliest, like I love fictional representations of carnivals and things like that. And I feel like it comes from reading Ray Bradbury when I was
absolutely. Something rolling into town. I also just think like the suspension, right? So they're sort of like, even at their happiest, even like the screams at the top of the roller coaster, somehow there's like an undercurrent of menace, because you're in a place where, who are these newcomers? Right. In this, I form like, it's just, you're right on the threshold. I feel like the place where like the lights and the music kind of peter out was always scary to me as a kid, when it's just like the moonlit grass, and maybe you're almost out of earshot of the party like that.
Did you see Us?
Yes.
That's like that moment when she like
great use of the boardwalk. Oh yeah.
She steps like down off the stairs into the sand, and it is like that transition between like the bustle of the boardwalk and then this like cool, dark place.
Right.
Like,
The maw that's just sort of waiting to swallow you back.
Oh.
What the carnival has been holding at bay, it turns out, all this time, right? And I also there's no utopias in this book. It's a pretty dark book, but I was thinking about there are these little pockets of joy, or there are these sort of like subversive sort of communities of people. What could be more profound than having a nightmare in common? And I think that's so literal in this book, but some of my best friendships and some of like, I think the closest communities that I know of, they're forged in weakness, or they're forged in people who have come through something that seemed unendurable, or people who share something, a private trauma, or, and I wonder too, if we're gonna, I think mercifully, like I haven't been affected by this particular illness, but I'm sure there are people right now who are finding each other, these long haulers, or people who, as much as you read about it, there's just no way to really understand unless you've gone through it, I'm sure. So. But I do sort of think, going back to like the dream supply, I was really interested and continue to be in the internet. I'm sort of a Luddite. I don't spend a lot of time online, but I'm as addicted to our phones as anyone. And I think it was just, we do have these nightmare contagions now, right? Like look at QAnon. I feel like that's a nightmare contagion.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No.
So someone has asked a question that I wanted to sort of build on. So Ron says, thanks for the wonderful event. I enjoy both of your works, short and long. And do you know going in if it's going to be a short story or a novel or novella, or does your form evolve in terms of like ideas? And I guess I wanted to sort of then, because this book is sort of like it's like a hybrid, right? It's like a novella length. So it's like a really long short story or like a pretty short novel. And so I guess I wanted to ask about the relationship with like that length of project. I say this as somebody who's only successfully written short stories, like in terms of length. Like I feel like the short story for me is like my ideal length. So like talk about how much longer is the print version than the Kindle version?
Oh, that? Well, that's the funny thing about the Kindle. Like it feels a little more amorphous.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you now, let's see. With like a decent sized font, this is like 160 pages, 146 pages. So it's funny. I remember like the longest story that I wrote in graduate school was 40 pages. And then I was like, this is going to be my novel. And indeed it was, like half a decade later, when I have just like, dragged myself through the swamp of my 20s. And I can't recommend that to anybody. I feel like if you think that, if you think that's an easy route to take to turn a story into a novel, I'm here to tell you, as a survivor, turn back now. Sometimes it works out, but figuring out what length a project is going to be, I feel like that's always a steep learning curve for me. And this one I really thought was going to be like a 3,000 word vignette. I was like, this is going to be some whimsical, kind of like Calvino-esque meditation on sleep and dreams. And it did sort of feel like I had something on the end of my line. And so I really had a good time, a good dark time thinking about what would happen if, almost the way that a child reads a book, it wasn't very more sophisticated than that. I just really wanted to know, let's just see if I kind of double down and commit to this premise, what's that going to reveal about the world in which we live, And it ended up like having, like, there's a lot of bureaucracy in this book, which surprised me. There's a lot of sort of like, corrupt institutions. And it wasn't, I think I had a really fun time writing that night world scene, because that felt a little more dreamy. Mm-hmm. There's like a poppy field, where people lay down and go to sleep. That felt like a little bit closer to sort of like a Twilight Zone interlude, But a lot of it is kind of like gritty, urban, these emergency workers who start to sort of symptomize the very conditions that they're treating. People who are, the protagonist, Trish, is sort of grief-stricken, and she is almost sort of like suffering her own kind of secondary insomnia, just sort of traumatically repeating the story of her dead sister. So what am I trying to say? I feel like the world of this story got really big. And that was so pleasurable to me. I mean, you can't really tell the story of a pandemic, I think, in fact, maybe you can, people do, but I wanted to sort of explore the escalation of this crisis. And I wanted there to be a tight focus and a pretty small cast of characters. Yeah. And so much of it is sort of centered around this one recruiter's grief and foreboding, and her relationship to the family of this little baby that they're mining for sleep. So I felt like it was sort of like wanting to have your cake and eat it too, probably, where I wanted the tight focus that, you know, and the ability to really delve deep with with a couple questions. And then also the roominess of a novel where you can imagine outward and you can imagine sort of the glee of just riffing on a premise. So, but I wish I could write things this length more often. I feel like I've been trying to write a second novel for all the years of my life, and I get a little lost. I get a little bit lost.
Well, I also sort of wonder, I mean, I feel like as a fellow, like, sort of writer of speculative fiction, like, there's also something really intoxicating about, like, the infrastructure of world building, where you're like, oh, well, if this is true, then, like, now I can, like, imagine, like, what this system would look like, and this system would look like, and I feel like you can sort of follow that kind of anywhere, and so the question is just sort of, like, where do you stop?
Yes,
like, okay,
bounds your,
yeah.
Yeah, totally. Right. Who do you hire to build a moat around your?
Right, exactly. Where you're like, okay, no more imagining what, like, this random thing would look like. I need to, like, focus on the thing. But I totally understand that instinct, and I feel like, so much of sort of speculative fiction that imagines, like, that's a world that's close to ours, is imagining, like, how these sort of branches or these pieces will work, and then deciding just where to draw the boundaries.
Right, where it's almost like an experiment you're running. It's like this wide-scale counterfactual, and you could, and it is so fun, and it does feel sort of like potentially endlessly,
right.
Like it might spawn some. That's the problem. Also, I feel like that's a very Floridian problem to have. The kudzu sprawl, you know, where you're like, where is the topiary artist? I need some help. So thank God for editors, also. Can I ask, Carmen, because I was curious about this. So when you worked on the comic, did you have to sort of storyboard it? Did you have to know where you wanted it to land? Or was that more intuitive?
Yeah, so actually, like, writing a comic is so different from fiction or from prose, because you have to, like, pitch something to somebody. So, like, at some point they're like, hey, we really need that storyboard. We need, like, what are the 6 issues going to look like? We need you to just, like, send us a document that's like, in this issue, this will happen. So I had to think about it, which is, like, totally backwards. Like, I'm one of those writers who never knows where I'm going when I'm writing. Like, I tend to just sort of, like, open up the document and, like, begin to write and, like, fill in the pieces. That's just the way that I work. And so to have to, like, not outline exactly, but to sort of know where it was going was strange. But that being said, in terms of, like, the scope and the scale, and having to have, like, 6 issues with their own mini arcs that then build into, like, one big arc, it actually was incredibly helpful to have to do that. Like, I was grateful that they made me do it. Even the time I was like, I hate this is awful. But I'm really glad I had to, and it really helped me, like, conceive of it and gave me ideas, and, like, you know, I could sort of scan the whole thing in, like, 3 pages, like, visually, and then I could sort of imagine, like, oh, I need to fix this thread. I can just, like, you know, carry it back through this thing or whatever. So first it was, you know, sort of outlining it, and then developing the scripts for each one.
Each of the sections.
Yeah.
Such a different way to work. That's wild.
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, it's completely unlike any system I've ever used. It is very interesting, and ultimately I'm really pleased with the results. And actually, it got me really interested in script writing in a way that I have never been in the past. I did very badly in a screenwriting class in college a million years ago, and was just like, well, guess that's not a thing I can do. But now I'm actually, like, I feel better about that part of it. So
yeah, no, I'm always interested in form, and, you know, different ways to. And I think what was fun to me about this premise, or, like, kind of like I often write this stuff with very goofy conceits, but it bounds something. It's a liberating constraint in a way. You know, or it's sort of like it sets you up to find your question. It's just also very fun to make something up. I feel like
really is. I also feel like, I don't know, something about the comic that was so strange for me was that it was the first time, so I mostly write in first person almost exclusively. And so it was also weird to write like two characters I mean, there are first person parts because they do narrate, but also it was weird like stepping back and having characters that I'm calling by their, like calling like their names. I don't know. It also felt like a totally different kind of writing process to me. So yeah, I don't know. Okay, so there's a question here that I wanted to ask. Someone says, I think I remember a short story from St. Lucy's Home for Girls Raised by Wolves about a sleepaway camp for insomniacs. Is this book connected to that story in any way?
Oh, thank you for that question. I'm glad to say that I did write that story. Wouldn't that be? I'm sorry, that was Borges. Next question. It's funny. This book is in first person, and I miss first person. Now I think it's tricky sometimes to find the right distance from the canvas, and yeah, pros and cons to both. But that story too was written in this book that's all about whacked out adolescents, and yes, who is not interested in sleep and dreams? I feel like perennially fascinating to me. And that was like this sleepaway camp for disordered dreamers. So they had, the people who suffered from incubi were in one bunk, and there were incontinent kids, there were sleepwalkers, night terrors. But this isn't sort of in any. I guess they're connected insofar as I wrote both of them, and I continue to be obsessed with sleep and dreams.
I think most writers too have like themes that like you can track throughout their work because it's clearly something that like they're really interested in. Yeah, like I mean, I'm sure like with every writer that I know, I feel like I could like probably trace like images or like themes or motifs or whatever.
Yeah, that's part of the scary fun, I think, is sort of. Well, I know you know this so well, that the body, I love your description of the body as a haunted house. So, of course, the same old ghosts are howling in different corridors and just showing up in new masks. And I think it's interesting to return to this. I tuned it up a little bit before this new publication, and I added very little, but new material beyond that appendix. But it was just interesting. The things that troubled me continue to trouble me, but I think now that I'm on this side of the parent-child equation, the idea of a mother, there's this mother in the book who has this sort of really vexing and opaque generosity, this sort of like really extreme altruism that compels her to let this organization continue to take donations from her daughter. And I think whatever moral calculus she's using continues to feel provocative to me. But now that we're in this situation where I think a lot of parents are saying, well, we have to balance the needs of our children with the needs of our community in all kinds of ways. There's so much in the discourse right now about parents hoarding advantage, or, this is very local to us, but just people looking for like pods for their kids. And, obviously they're, children that don't have that ability. Yeah. And so like the way that a pandemic accelerates inequality. And, I just think that there is a way where that you don't want it ever to feel like an alibi. We so fetishize the family in this country. And I think a lot of the concerns of this book now that really register for me are thinking through, what are the ulterior motives that you're rationalizing? How are you rationalizing them? What's that balance between wanting to protect your family and like recognizing that you're part of a wider world? How do you extend the borders of your family? Because I definitely, we're seeing that everywhere, just this sort of animal instinct to kind of gate your community, or sort of come inside your walled garden. And it's just interesting, I think, to kind of like in the emergency lighting of 2020 return to this story as a mother and sort of think through some of these questions.
Yeah. Someone asks a question that we were sort of talking about before everybody showed up, which is, are you finding COVID and quarantine inspiring and freeing for your writing, or is it difficult to work right now?
I like expiring. I think it's We were just talking about that. I'm finding it pretty hard, guys.
Yeah.
I
But you also have like children. I feel like there's also like your kids and like, I mean, there's so many other, I feel like I feel guilty because I feel like I have no excuse. But like,
know.
so,
Oh my God, Carmen, I feel like the sky is literally falling.
I do that every day. I'm just like listening to my news podcast while I'm brushing my teeth, and I'm like, yeah, like what will I do today besides like panic?
That's how I feel every day. Michael Barbaro is like, it's time to panic in his sweet voice.
Yeah.
No, I think it's been really hard for me to find the kind of sustained focus you need to get into a dream world. You know, there's a lot competing for our attention right now.
Yeah.
Although my agent just did tell me that a lot of people are completing their longer projects. And I was like, nice.
You're like, is that a nudge? What are you saying to me?
I was like, I completed my longer project of, Laundry Mountain. So
right. I also got to the bottom of like a laundry pile in the very beginning of quarantine that I had been like eyeing for a really long time. So
I know, where are our trophies?
I don't know, right? Okay, let's see. Sam Stevenson from Converge in Colorado Springs. Hi, Sam.
Hi, Sam.
I'm ever obsessed with the question. Can you talk a bit about how the body shows up in your stories? How do you imagine your character's physical form in relationship to the questions or problems or plot of a given story?
Oh, well, this is one reason I was so excited. Sorry, this feels like the tilt-a-whirl. I don't know what I'm doing. Let me put that down. This is one of the reasons I was so happy to be in conversation with you, Carmen, is I feel like the body is just a subject of endless inquiry. And also there's a way of thinking through these, making material something that people think of as, like a dream that is so, making it kind of literal or concrete, or finding a way to, take a metaphor and really inhabit it, turn it into architecture, turn it into something that can be a vessel for truth. So in this story, I mean, people are really mining each other's bodies for sleep and dreams. And I was reading Surveillance Capitalism, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. If anybody needs a new nightmare, there's one. So much of it is just about how we wire ourselves to, the great lidless eye of the internet. And of course, technology is value neutral, right? But just the way that it is harvesting data from our bodies, she calls it, private experience. And how, that's how, obviously we're always bringing new things into the market. So nature becomes real estate. A dream becomes a data point that is sold from third party to third party. Your devices eavesdrop on you and turn that, goes down a conveyor belt and becomes some kind of predictive AI. Mm-hmm. It's a really scary time. And I think it helps sort of to find ways to be honest about, to use that kind of concrete, the physicality of the body. We were talking a little bit over email, Carmen and I, about that amazing Eagleton quote, capitalism plunders the sensuality of the body. Mm-hmm. So I think fiction is a way to sort of show that. Definitely speculative fiction can show that. And also just dimensions of experience that are very hard to talk about on this plane. Yeah.
This makes me think of a story I did for the New Yorker in like 2013. It was a while ago, about this woman who had died in like, I think Michigan or Minnesota. She'd been, so what had happened was she had been a single woman who was not super close to her family. She had recently quit her job because I think she was like planning on traveling a whole bunch. And then no one sort of heard from her for a long time. And it turned out, and then at some point, like her house got foreclosed on. And when the bank went to go look at the house, they found her body, like her mummified body. She'd been dead for like 7 years or something. And it was just that all of her bills were like on automatic. And so like everything was just paid. And so like, and her neighbors were like, well, she travels a lot. So they were like mowing her lawn for her. And like, and because she wasn't going to her job, like nobody noticed that this woman had died. And it was this really like, obviously like a really sad story, but I sort of wrote this piece thinking about like our digital personas and like how in like many ways they mirror, like doppelgangers, like they mirror us in these really bizarre ways. but also are not us at the same time. And it's like weird to imagine like at that moment, like at some point she had passed, but like her digital doppelganger was
all
still
of her avatars were still running, right? And just like the automation of identity, it is very scary.
And I mean, I guess we also think about it in terms of like, you know, when people, like when, I don't know, like I was also very active on LiveJournal as a young person. And I remember the first time that somebody I knew very well on LiveJournal died. And then there was just this online diary that existed that like happened and then stopped. And I was like, nobody will ever add to this again. And it's like this weird, like great digital tombstone. And I feel like that sort of idea of this like digital doppelganger and the way it like connects to us and also separates from us is like so chilling and interesting. And I feel like it's like that's like the modern it's like the modern condition in like a nutshell, right?
And the way that your materials can mix, you know, in the ether world, right? The sort of like the velocity, you know, and just like the crushing volume of data actually that you can sort of ingest on a daily basis and feed into. It's really how new it is, I think, is sometimes lost on me. I mean, you know, when I was a teenager, I remember the sound of the dial-up modem, you know, like there's all these like extinct sounds now. But I was just teaching 8 bytes in a class on strange appetites, speaking of doppelgangers. And I do think that, I mean, that's something that I love about your fiction and fiction generally, is there's a way to represent the overlap of memory and sensation and desire and these things that are actually concurrent, you know, they're nonlinear. I just think it's really difficult, even in a great conversation like this one, to represent that flux that's always happening in all of our bodies.
Right.
Or the way, you know, and that's what I loved about, you know, dreams are so interesting to me that way too, because here is this collage that your mind is making for you out of your deepest privacy, something that you really can't mediate or control, and something that's presented to you for your interpretation, like on a nightly basis. Yeah. I don't know. I find that very consoling too. I'm like, you know, the most normal person you know definitely has a sloshy phantasmagoria inside them. So.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
Right? So we're in good company here.
I also sort of wonder, I feel like there's something also that's very interesting with like, you know, speaking of like, you know, I mean, we're doing this event over Zoom, obviously, like there's something really weird to me about, like, I am sitting in my house, you are sitting in your house, everybody is sitting in their houses, like we're all separated. And I feel like, digital events are so different, right? Because like when you're in a physical room, there's like human energy and like human like sweat and messiness. And like, there's something about being in a room with another person, you can like read a room in a really different way than you can't do it like over. And this is also true of like teaching. Like I prefer, like I want to teach, I miss teaching in person because like I miss having that like tactile sensation of like being a body in a room with other bodies and how that informs like the conversation and like the stuff happening in our minds. And it's like really weird to just like, it's like, oh, now it's all digital. And it like I mean, it isn't, obviously it's what we have to do. And I don't begrudge anyone that, but like, it is also like really different and like in this really sad way that like, is so strange.
Me and this slender plant agree with you. Like I couldn't figure out. I obviously didn't read enough of those like how to look your best on Zoom articles because I was just like, is this how? I don't know.
That's a mother-in-law's tongue, isn't it?
What's that?
A mother-in-law's tongue or a snake plant?
It's a snake plant, but is that another name for it?
Another name for it. I mean, it's a fairly sexist name, but yeah, I remember like someone telling me that it was called a mother-in-law's tongue, and I was like, well, that's great. That's a really good plant name.
Right. Discovered and named, you know, in the write-up. Sexist botanist society.
Right, exactly. Someone who really hated his mother-in-law. Let's do one more question. Let's see. Somebody is asking, so Isabel says, talking about the body in a different way, how do you consider trauma as a physical problem of the body in your work? I'm thinking about books like The Body Keeps the Score and how that crosses over to like fiction. Thank you.
I'm trying to think how to answer that question. I mean, I think, you know, there is this way where this book is so concerned with recurring nightmares, you know, a nightmare that just keeps regenerating inside you. And everyone is
what the
lost the ability to, you know, like, time, something has happened. Like, and I know Carmen writes so beautifully about hauntings. I think this is a really haunted woman in the book. You know, her sister has died of this disease, and she's sort of, her job is just to tell that story over and over again, to convince people to donate their sleep. And her sister kind of starts to escape the grammar of this old horror story she's been telling. And actually that's, you know, freeing for her, that's liberating to her. But there is a way where I think it feels like a betrayal, you know, like the scar healing is going to feel like a betrayal to this particular character. And so I think there's something about, I always think of like blood welling to a cut, you know, just continuously welling to a cut, like that kind of open wound. I think that's the state that this woman exists in. And you know, I was just interested, like, this is obviously, you know, everybody in the world has lost the ability to sleep. But for this particular character, I think grief can disrupt linear time in that way. It disrupts chronology. I'm always interested in that, you know, how one memory can kind of eclipse your entire present. And stop time, really stop you from like moving through time towards the future. And I think we've been thinking, all of us, about viruses in a way that has nothing to do with metaphors. But there is something about the viral replication of a single memory and its desire to sort of like subsume you, right? Use you to keep making itself over and over. I think that I have a memory set like that. And it's been really, you know, I don't think fiction writing is ever therapy, obviously, but it has been sort of liberating to discover, oh, you can make something out of this well. You can be like a hydrologist of this material. Like you know, I don't know if you've had a similar experience. Or...
Well, I couldn't help but think of like the way that she sort of had to perform the trauma of talking about her sister as a part of her job and as to do this like necessary thing. I couldn't help but think of, like, you know, I just toured a memoir, like before COVID, like I was touring a memoir, which was about like one of the worst things that ever happened to me. And I had to just, you know, go from city to city and like read from this book and then talk about it. And it was weird because I did it because I was like, I'd be a real asshole to my publisher if I didn't like do a tour. But I also was like, I really wish I didn't have to tour or talk about this book. I wish I could talk about literally anything else, like fiction, whatever. Even the fiction with the scariest, like most upsetting content is like better than like having to sort of like talk about this horrible thing over and over, even if it's for a good reason, even if it's for a good cause, like even if I feel like it's the right thing to do. And I don't know, I kept thinking about the way that we sort of commodify trauma and the way that is also sort of part of, I mean, I guess also with fiction as well, but especially with like nonfiction, where I feel like a lot of people who enter into the writing world, it's with this currency of like, what's the worst shit that ever happened to you? And like, how can we sort of package it and sell it? That's why I always used to hate that, what was that essay series that XO Jane used to do, It Happened to Me or whatever, because it was always just like the worst stuff. And it was like, you're getting paid $100 or $50 or whatever to like, you know, narrate this like, thing. And it just felt like this way that we sort of like, you know, chew up like vulnerable people and spit them out. And we're like, we don't want to hear like your imagination. We just want to know like your sort of most intense traumas.
Right.
Which is not to say that's like what my book was. Like I chose to submit my book, but I just feel like there's something kind of interesting in there that I was also thinking about with this book as well. I don't know if I have a cohesive thought, but yeah, we like to like package trauma in interesting ways and sell it. And it feels progressive sometimes. And yet it also...
No, it's good to be wary. I think it's absolutely good to be wary. And I think it's hard not to feel like a product when you're sort of on the road, you know, and of course you're grateful, right? Like I feel the same way. Of course you're grateful that people are reading your work. But it's just sort of feeling the suction of those market forces in the way that they completely dehumanize you. Yeah. And we've all experienced that. I think that was really interesting to me about this book. I have no faith, much like this protagonist, that they won't immediately turn sleep into a commodity, and that, you know, there won't be like the haves and the have-nots of who can sleep and dream and who can't, because that's the world we live in.
That's what happens, right? Like, I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but like there is like an element of like capitalism and like the way that capitalism is sort of in exacting a sort of force. And it's like, you know, in the same way that like, you know, they're like, we'll have COVID drugs, but like companies are probably going to charge like $10 bajillion for them. Or the fact that people like, you know, can't afford insulin, or like, HIV drugs were like so unaffordable, like that. Yeah, like, and they can turn any human tragedy into like
into a profit bonanza.
Yeah.
I think that's it, and I think that's sort of part of the horror, is thinking it's something as intimate as your own private wilderness getting kind of, tested and spun. And I that is a real. I had dinner with Ted Chiang not right before kind of the world closed down, and he reassured me that we're still quite a ways from even the most advanced technologies being able to eavesdrop on your dreams. I offer that to you guys. Ted was like, no, it's okay. And he was like, before we have AI that's going to enslave us, it's just going to be really pissed off AI. He's like, there'll be a continuum. So that made me feel better.
Man, I want to like narrate all my fears to Ted Chiang and have him just like at a list.
We did both sort of agree that, it doesn't, the way that Google, right? The way that Google is always searching us. We think we're searching for something, but it's searching us and compiling that data. I do kind of think it's not, your dreams are, I can absolutely imagine a scenario where everyone is sleeping with a sleep mask and uploading their feed to some cloud and it's being scanned for viruses. That doesn't seem so far off to me somehow. Or just the idea of, things just going from being messages or something so intensely beautiful and private as a dream becoming a commodity or a neuro experience that you can because it's sort of happening. I don't know. Keep your dreams inside you guys, or write books.
Right? Yeah, right. It's like you can do it as long as it's on your terms and you're like turning your weird wilderness into like little snippets of things you can sell or like.
Don't give them to Elon Musk. You buy an easel.
Oh well, Karen, this was so delightful. I'm
thanks for doing this with me, Carmen. It was so fun.
Y'all should pick up Sleep Donation. It is a beautiful like physical object, and of course the story is wonderful. It was such a pleasure to read, and the illustrations are gorgeous. The metamatter in the back is so good. It's just a really beautiful object. So please order it from your local indie bookstore.
Powerhouse.
Carmen. Thank you. And don't forget to check out Carmen's comic also. It's both of our book birthdays.
Yep.
Yes, we have links for both of them in the chat here. Thank you so much to Karen and Carmen and everybody who asked questions. Sorry we couldn't get to all of them. For everyone who ordered a signed book, I've sent around an email asking for your address. So please let me know where you want me to send it. If you want to get another copy, the link is in the chat. And
thank you guys so much. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you, Carmen. Get vaccinated and come hug me, or I'll find you.
I'm gonna go out clubbing. I don't even like going out at night. I'm gonna go clubbing. I'm gonna hug every person I meet.
Oh yeah,
have a whole list.
I'm gonna lick some faces. I can't wait. I'll see you on the other side. Shadow casting reality. Bye. Thank you guys. Thank you, Carmen. Thank you, Powerhouse.
Bye.